I'm Sabine Klaus. I'm the Joe and Jella Utley Curator of Brass Instruments at the National Music Museum. I've worked for the museum since the year 2000, and I've mostly taken care of a collection in South Carolina, which already belongs to the National Music Museum. The keyed trumpet was originally conceived by none other than Leonardo da Vinci. He describes the idea of adding holes to a trumpet and a whole key mechanism, because he imagined that this would make the trumpet more versatile, because the trumpet, like a bugle, would have been limited to the harmonic series, which is just the overtones that you would typically associate with a bugle call. Now, for a very long time, this idea was basically forgotten. There is a little reference in the early 17th century about the possibility of adding holes to a trumpet. And then towards the end of the 18th century, this idea was getting more and more pressing, because the skill of playing the trumpet in the high range, where you can play melodies, got lost more and more at that time. And that made the trumpet a very, very limited instrument. You could only play a few notes in the lower range, and by adding keys, you had the option of increasing that number. And you also had the option of improving certain notes that were a little bit out of tune. Now, the problem with the keyed trumpet is that if you open a tiny little hole, the effect of your bell is decreased. So it doesn't sound as good as a note that is played with the little hole closed. And that was a problem of the keyed trumpet all along. Clever composers like Haydn knew that, and they placed these notes that sounded a bit quieter and a bit duller in timbre on the weaker parts of a measure. So they included it in their composition in a very clever way. And by 1814, a new idea took hold to add tubing operated by a valve, which created a much better sounding instrument, an instrument that had all the notes sounding equally, because the effect of the bell wasn't reduced as it was with the keyed trumpet. And that is the beginning of what we know nowadays as the valve trumpet, or valve instruments in general. And that meant that the keyed trumpet didn't have a very long life. The interesting thing about the Austrian keyed trumpet that Haydn then used was that the tradition was to hold the trumpet with the left hand, because you would rein the horse with the right hand. So all the Austrian keyed trumpets are left-handed. Later on in Italy, they are right-handed, and this is the instrument the National Music Museum has on display tonight. Now, Barry Boggess is playing an instrument that is based on an Austrian left-handed one, but it was remodeled to be played right-handed, because modern trumpeters are much more versatile with their right hand, because usually the valves would be operated with the right hand. And the reduction of the effect of the bell when you open a hole, as I've already mentioned, has all kinds of challenges for the performer. in particular, it not only changes the timbre, but it also makes it more difficult to play the notes in tune because they are not as well supported as they are in an instrument where the bell has a greater effect. So you would hear these slightly duller notes, or maybe even some that are not exactly in tune with equal temperament, which is the temperament that's used nowadays, where every tone is equally far apart from every other tone. So it is a very, very big challenge to play the keyed trumpet and to overcome all these problems. Very skilled players can smoothen out these differences. So you will certainly have to be a bit more aware of having different expectations. Well, the problem of using this instrument with modern instruments is that the balance is off a bit, because you're playing it with modern string instruments and they would have sounded quieter back then, so we don't have a totally authentic experience tonight. However, it will give us new insights into how the composer, Haydn, conceived the piece and how it sounded to the people back then, and how he tried to surprise audiences, for example. It starts with a simple triad, as if nothing was new. So for the audience that heard this piece for the first time, and they had in their program that this was a brand new instrument, they were surprised and maybe slightly disappointed at first, but it at the same time heightened their attention to listen for the novelty. And if we want to experience the same thing nowadays, we sort of need to think backwards and imagine how exciting the novelty was for these people. And that is our challenge as listeners.